Case of Adam Strong. Adam Strong was born in 1972 in Cornwall, Ontario, Canada. Very little is known about his family and upbringing. He never got married and didn't have any children. Strong worked at a local gas station and also as a security guard on a movie set. People who knew him described him as eccentric and arrogant, believing he was smarter than others. He enjoyed arguing and trying to prove his point until others agreed, but he wasn't typically aggressive. On September 11, 2017, a fisherman in Oshawa, Ontario, made a disturbing discovery in the city harbor. He found a badly disfigured and decomposed human torso floating in the water. The fisherman immediately reported his finding to the police, who retrieved the remains and sent them to forensics for analysis. Due to the body's severe decomposition, experts had a hard time identifying it. The torso was missing limbs and a head, and its internal organs were gone. The only clues about the victim were that she was a young woman between 18 and 25 years old. Her fingerprints, dental records, and distinguishing features couldn't be used for identification. A partial tattoo on her neck was visible, but its design was impossible to determine due to decomposition. As a result, a DNA analysis was the only remaining option, but no matches were found in the existing database. The police then began investigating cases of young women who had gone missing in recent months. In November 2017, nearly 2 months after the discovery, authorities identified the body as 18-year-old Rory Hatch, a high school student who had vanished in mid-August. She was several weeks pregnant at the time of her disappearance. Divers searched the harbor and nearby Lake Ontario shoreline, but no other body parts were found. The time and cause of death remained unknown. Experts examined the body and found numerous severe injuries inflicted while Rory was still alive, suggesting she had been tortured over a long period before her death. This discovery led to a major breakthrough in the investigation. For months later, an unexpected twist emerged. In December, the Wood family moved into a house at 19 McMillan Drive, Oshawa, where they noticed an unpleasant smell. Their downstairs neighbor, 45-year-old Adam Strong, assured them it was just a minor plumbing issue that he would fix soon. The neighbor tried to be friendly and polite, but there was something unsettling about him. When David's wife tried to welcome him with homemade cookies, he refused to let her enter his apartment, instead stepping out into the hallway and quickly closing the door behind him. In that brief moment, she caught a glimpse of his living space, which was in disarray, and was overwhelmed by the foul smell inside. Adam took the cookies, thanked the neighbor, and quickly excused himself. Later, when they crossed paths in the yard, he apologized for not inviting her in, explaining that he was about to start renovations and his apartment was not presentable at the time. Despite his polite demeanor, he seemed visibly nervous. As the Wood family settled into their new home, they tried to ignore the unbearable smell. However, on December 29th, they finally called a plumber to investigate a sewer blockage, which had intensified the stench. Although the issue seemed minor and easily solvable, the discovery the workers made in the pipes was shocking, even to experienced forensic experts. Human body parts had been found. Sean Fenn, a plumber, and his partner were called to the Wood family's apartment to fix a clogged refrigerator drain. However, when they arrived, they were met with an overwhelming stench, which they soon discovered was coming from the apartment below, belonging to Adam Strong. Upon entering Strong's apartment, the smell intensified, becoming almost unbearable. Sean, an experienced plumber, had never encountered anything so foul-smelling in his career. While working to clear the pipe, Strong's behavior became increasingly strange and nervous. He refused to leave the area, constantly asking questions about the process. The plumbers tried to ignore Strong's antics, but what they discovered next would be shocking. As they extracted the blockage, they found over 10 kilograms of entangled flesh, hair, and bone fragments, including disfigured human fingers. Strong remained surprisingly calm, asking how the remains ended up in the pipe. Fenn immediately called the police, suspecting they had stumbled upon human remains in the pipes. When the police arrived, they confirmed the discovery of human flesh. Instead of denying the allegations, Strong calmly admitted that Rory Hatch's body parts were stuck in the pipe, with additional remains stored in his freezer. A search of the freezer revealed a severed head, limb fragments, and more, all packed in plastic bags. The apartment was in disarray, with dirty dishes, rotting food, trash, and empty pizza boxes littering the floor. The police also found numerous adult magazines with sadistic content, as well as intimate toys, gags, whips, handcuffs, and devices for binding and hanging, suggesting a disturbing atmosphere. Adam's social media profiles openly displayed his interest in BDSM practices, with explicit photos and videos. Although he didn't have a long-term partner, several former partners accused him of being abusive, leading to their breakups. He wrote reviews of adult films and magazines, indicating he spent most of his free time consuming such content. Behind his calm exterior, he led a secretive life. The police cordoned off Adam's residence, treating it as a crime scene. The initial investigation suggested that they had a lot of work ahead, with potential discoveries that could be just as shocking as the head found in the refrigerator. Notably, the evidence found led investigators to suspect that the discovered body parts belonged to Rory Hatch, whose torso was found in a water body 4 months earlier. A distinctive tattoo on the neck and DNA analysis supported this theory. In Adam's house, investigators found disturbing evidence of a gruesome crime. Hidden among piles of trash were the blood-stained clothes and shoes of Rory Hatch, later confirmed to be the missing schoolgirl. The bedroom, where her bed was found, was covered in her blood, with splatters on the walls, furniture, and ceiling. A dissection table was found in the kitchen, suggesting that the suspect had dismembered and gutted the girl there. The entire area was contaminated with blood, skin particles, hair, and bone fragments. The bathroom was equally appalling, with dirt, blood, and signs of brutal acts everywhere. It appeared that Adam had attempted to dispose of the body by flushing it down the toilet in parts, but when this failed, he tried to fix the blockage himself. A large collection of sharp weapons was also found in the house, likely used to dismember the girl's body. Rory Hatch was born in 1999 to a single mother, Shannon Dion. Despite her father's absence, Rory grew up in a loving environment, thanks to her mother and grandmother. Her family had a unique background, with her maternal grandfather founding a motorcycle club and being a skilled boxer with ties to the criminal underworld. Rory had a peaceful and carefree childhood, excelled in dance, and was an award-winning student. At 13, she received an award as the best cadet of the year in her local army unit. However, her life took a dramatic turn at 15 when she got introduced to drugs by a friend and became dependent. She began associating with questionable individuals, neglected her studies, and eventually stopped attending school altogether. For about a year, Rory's family tried to get her help for her addiction, but she would relapse every time. At 17, she ran away from home and turned to prostitution to support her drug habit. Then, her mother got her into a specialized program for teenagers with addictions, which forced her into treatment. This time, the efforts paid off and Rory was able to get back on track. She got a job, studied remotely, and eventually earned her high school diploma. She started planning for college and began a serious relationship with a boy named Anthony. In June 2017, Rory told her mother that she was pregnant and planned to keep the baby. However, Rory's mother didn't know that her daughter had started using drugs again. Rory met with Constable Christopher Crane at a shopping center in mid-August. He had been monitoring her for 18 months to keep her away from negative influences. During their meeting, Rory confessed that she had started using drugs again and lost her job a month prior, often exchanging sexual favors for money or drugs. Constable Crane was deeply disturbed by her revelation and promised to help. He stepped away to make an urgent call to arrange for her hospitalization. However, when he returned, Rory was gone, and the constable was unable to find her. The next day, Rory's mother and uncle took her to the hospital after finding her incoherent due to substance use. They left her in the emergency room queue and stepped out for about an hour. When they returned, they were shocked to discover that Rory had vanished. And sadly, she was never seen alive again. A review of hospital surveillance footage showed that Rory simply got up and left the hospital on her own. Her family reported her missing the next day, but despite an extensive search effort and widespread social media attention, no one was able to find her. It's likely that her addiction led her to seek out drugs at Strong's house, where she may have exchanged sexual favors for them. After Adam alerted the police to the location of the remaining body parts, an investigation was launched. Investigators expected him to cooperate, but instead, he became unresponsive and refused to answer questions at the police station. He remained calm and denied any wrongdoing. Because there was no direct evidence linking him to the girl's murder, Adam was only charged with desecrating a body. His lawyer's efforts to secure bail were unsuccessful, and he was held in jail awaiting trial. The investigators struggled to find an effective approach to questioning him, trying to elicit an emotional response that might provoke a confession. Strong was evasive when questioned about Rory's presence in his house and what he did to her, but openly discussed his fondness for bladed weapons and extensive knife collection. A thorough search of Adam's house uncovered a dirty hunting knife with dried skin fragments that appeared human in a hidden closet. Although the DNA from the knife didn't match Rory's, it belonged to another individual. It took several months to identify the owner of the DNA, but by July 2018, it was established that the traces on the weapon belonged to Candace Fitzpatrick, a woman who had vanished about 10 years prior. Candace Fitzpatrick shared similarities with Rory. Both struggled with substance abuse and legal issues, grew up in troubled families, and had a history of running away from home for months at a time. To survive, she would live with acquaintances and exchange sex for food and drugs. Born in 1989, Candace was 18 when she disappeared. Her family didn't notice her absence initially and only reported her missing almost 2 years later, by which time all leads had gone cold. Candace's life and social circle led many to believe she could have ended up anywhere. Her parents thought she had run away and held on to the hope that she would return. However, in 2018, the news from law enforcement crushed their hopes of ever seeing their daughter alive again. It's worth noting that both victims of the suspect were the same age and looked almost identical, like sisters. This led people to believe that the police had caught a serial predator. When questioned about the second woman, the suspect unexpectedly agreed to cooperate in exchange for better living conditions. He wanted a private cell, a large TV, internet access, and specific meals. Law enforcement officials were outraged by his demands, but they relented to get the information. Adam began his story by talking about his difficult childhood, including how he was abused by his stepfather from the age of 5. He also described how he started torturing and killing animals from the age of 7, finding physical pleasure in these acts. When the conversation turned to Rory, Adam Strong described in detail how he had dismembered her, seemingly taking pleasure in it, but claiming he only did so because she had died from an overdose. However, the police did not believe him, and he was unable to convince them of his story. When questioned about Candace, who had disappeared 10 years prior, Strong was surprised the police knew about her. He tried to find out how they had discovered his secret, and when told about human flesh stuck to an old knife, he became somber and regretful for not taking better precautions to cover his tracks. Strong admitted to meeting Candace but denied killing her. However, the evidence gathered did not support his claim. In an attempt to gain sympathy, he inadvertently incriminated himself. The police informed him that Rory was pregnant at the time of her death, which Strong vehemently denied. The detectives realized that Strong would argue endlessly to prove his point, so they decided to provoke him into revealing more than he intended. They insisted that the victim was pregnant, and Strong, trying to prove otherwise, described in detail how he had examined Rory's reproductive organs and felt a pulsation, leading the police to believe that she might have still been alive during the attack. Later, Strong tried to deny everything, but his statements had been recorded on camera and were presented in court. He refused to disclose what he had done with Candace's body, and her remains were never found. The detectives were unable to learn about any other possible victims. During one of the last interrogations, Strong callously stated that he would like his condolences to be passed on to Rory's parents. At the trial, his lawyers argued that Strong was mentally ill and unable to be held responsible for his actions. However, a psychiatric evaluation determined that despite certain disorders, Strong was aware of his actions and could be held legally accountable. The trial began in September 2020, 3 years after Rory's death and 12 years after Candace's disappearance. Strong was charged with 2 counts of murder and desecration of Rory's remains. Although he never admitted his guilt, the evidence and his confessions left no doubt about his involvement in the heinous crimes. 4 of Strong's former partners also testified, describing his cruelty and violent tendencies. According to the prosecution, Strong had lured both women to his home, promising them money for intimate services, and then killed them. Adam Strong brutally murdered his victim, subjecting her to a prolonged and agonizing ordeal. He likely killed her out of fear that she would report him to the authorities. On September 4th, his mobile phone signal was detected near the city harbor, where he had dumped the victim's torso, hoping the current would carry it away. In April 2021, Adam Strong was convicted of murdering Candace Fitzpatrick and Rory Hatch, as well as desecrating Hatch's remains. He received a life sentence without parole. However, Strong showed no remorse, stating in his final remarks that his prison cell was an improvement over his previous living conditions. 6 months into his sentence, Strong unexpectedly revealed the location of his first victim's remains. The police followed his directions, and after several months of searching, they discovered human bones. DNA testing confirmed that the skeleton belonged to Candace Fitzpatrick, which was officially announced. Investigators believe that there may be additional victims in the Adam Strong case, possibly including at least one more woman. Notably, when Strong was initially arrested, his personal belongings were confiscated, including a chain with 3 rings. He later requested the items return, stating that the rings held sentimental value. Relatives of Rory and Candace later identified 2 of the rings as belonging to their dead daughters. However, the 3rd ring remains unidentified, sparking speculation about potential additional victims. Stacy Ruth Daniels, who would later be known as Stacy Castor, was born on July 24, 1967, in Clay, New York. She was the only child of Jerry Daniels and Judy Eaton. Little is known about the early years of the cheerful red-haired girl. Her mother, Judy, once mentioned that Stacy had big dreams for herself. She emphasized that Stacy was very intelligent and had confided in her that she dreamed of attending university and becoming a legal assistant or lawyer. Those close to Stacy described her as a shy young girl who found it difficult to start conversations but eventually managed to socialize at school gatherings or family events. In 1985, at the age of 17, Stacy was still in high school when her life took an unexpected turn. During this time, she met the outgoing Michael Wallace, who was 23 years old. Michael, born on September 16, 1961, in Auburn, New York, worked as a mechanic. Despite their contrasting personalities, they began dating a few months after their first meeting. While Michael enjoyed being the center of attention and surrounded by people, the reserved Stacy preferred to stay quiet and keep a low profile. However, their temperaments seemed to complement each other, and the couple formalized their relationship. Stacy, excited, told her close friends that she fell in love with Michael within 5 minutes of meeting him and was certain she would become Mrs. Wallace. On April 7, 1987, Stacy's prediction came true. After 2 years of dating, the 20-year-old Stacy married the 25-year-old Michael. Judy recalled that her daughter was very happy after the wedding. A year later, in 1988, the Wallaces welcomed their first daughter, Ashley. Instead of bringing them closer, the birth of their daughter began to distance Michael and Stacy. Within a few months, problems between the couple became apparent. Stacy, a stay-at-home mom, relied solely on Michael's income, which created financial strain with the arrival of another mouth to feed. 3 years later, in 1991, the couple had their second daughter, Brin. Rather than bringing joy, the new baby did not improve the tense family atmosphere. Stacy began accusing Michael of favoring their younger daughter, creating a family divide with 2 sides. Michael was closer to Brin, while Stacy formed a stronger bond with Ashley. It is unclear if the sisters' relationship was affected by their parents' preferences. Ashley and Stacy started having a relationship that was more like best friends than mother and daughter, a fact they both were very proud of. In In the following years, the arguments between Michael and Stacy became more frequent, making the situation unbearable and leading to their separation. Rumors soon spread about the reasons behind their breakup. Stacy accused Michael of drug and alcohol abuse, allegations that were never confirmed. Others suggested that both were having extramarital affairs, a theory that also remained unproven. Friends of the couple attributed the distance to Stacy starting to work as an ambulance driver at night, while Michael spent all day repairing vehicles. Despite both having jobs, their financial problems persisted. Although they were separated, Stacy and Michael had not finalized their divorce, possibly holding on to the hope that things might improve between them. By the winter of 1999, Michael Wallace's family stated that he was considering legalizing his separation from Stacy. Amidst this marital crisis and the cold weather, Michael began to experience health issues. What started as a simple earache quickly escalated into a much more severe illness. Ashley later recalled that during this time, her father had trouble walking and speaking. She remembered seeing him sitting in the dining room drinking coffee when he suddenly started vomiting. He then lay down on the bed and fell asleep as if nothing had happened. Michael's discomfort persisted, leading him to seek medical attention. He told the doctors he felt lethargic. His sister was the first to notice something was seriously wrong with Michael's health. She observed his alarming deterioration during the family's Christmas gathering that year. Rosemary noted that Michael was coughing a lot and looked very swollen. A few weeks after the holidays, on January 11, 2000, Michael was found unconscious on the family home's couch. He was rushed to the hospital, where he died hours after being admitted. Ashley, who was 11 at the time, remembered the last moment she saw her father alive. She said Michael was lying on the couch making funny faces. Suddenly, he raised his arm in the air, then put it down and his arm just fell. Michael Wallace was 38 years old when he died. The medical report stated that he had died of a heart attack. Those close to Michael found it strange. He was a young and healthy man, with his only recent medical visit being for an ear infection. His sister disagreed with the doctor's conclusion that Michael had died of cardiac arrest. She claimed that before his death, Michael's skin had turned a deep purple from his head to his chest. When she requested an autopsy, Stacy refused. The grieving widow said she did not doubt the doctor's diagnosis and expertise. Stacy's refusal for an autopsy seemed reasonable, and Michael's sister put her suspicions aside. Michael was eventually buried in the local cemetery. In the following months, Stacy received all of Michael's financial assets, including a $55,000 life insurance payout. However, misfortune seemed to follow Stacy. 2 years later, on February 26, 2002, her father was hospitalized with what appeared to be a minor lung condition. Jerry responded well to treatment, and the doctors decided to discharge him. However, a few days after leaving the hospital, he died suddenly. Witnesses stated that Jerry collapsed after a visit from his daughter, Stacy. The autopsy report on Jerry's body concluded that he had died of natural causes. As Jerry's sole heir, Stacy decided to cremate his remains. After these two close deaths, the attractive redhead was determined to rebuild her life. It wasn't long before Stacy found the perfect candidate to give love another chance. Through her boss, the widow and mother of 2 girls met a divorced man named David Castor. David was born on June 12, 1957, in Syracuse, New York. He was one of 4 children born to Philip and Joyce Castor. He spent his entire life in the Liverpool area, where he established his refrigeration company, Liverpool Heating, which he directed and operated. David was also a longtime member of a 4-wheeler club and the Snow Pals snowmobile club. Stacy and David quickly began a relationship, and after a few months of dating, they married on August 16, 2003. From that date, she started using her second husband's surname. Initially, the couple seemed happy, but behind closed doors, their relationship was becoming difficult. The story seemed to be repeating itself for Stacy. According to people close to the couple, Stacy was uncomfortable with the close bond her new husband had with his son, David Jr., and his mother, Janice Poisson, David's first wife. To make matters worse, David did not get along with his stepdaughters. According to Ashley's later accounts, David was a bad stepfather who wanted nothing to do with her and her younger sister, Bri. David reportedly told the young girls that he had no intention of being their father, as he already had a son, which was enough for him. Ashley mentioned that there was tension often caused by her mother's new husband. Stacy also shared with some close friends the discomfort that permeated her home. She claimed that David was difficult with the girls, as he expected them to do everything he said without question. Despite these issues, Stacy maintained that her relationship with her husband was good. However, the reality was that their problems were pushing the marriage to a breaking point. The final straw for the Castors came on Sunday, August 21, 2005, when David planned a surprise getaway to celebrate their second wedding anniversary. Ashley had just started her first job and couldn't watch her sister Bri that night. Thus, the Castor Sunday outing was canceled. This led to a 7-hour argument in the garage. Afterward, David took a bottle of alcohol and locked himself in a room. The next day, Monday, August 22nd, Stacy was still upset, so she went to work without entering the room where David had spent the night. At the office, Stacy called 911, expressing her concern for her husband, whom she had last seen the previous day after he locked himself in a room following a marital fight. The police arrived at the house shared by the couple and Stacy's daughters. The officers knocked on the bedroom door, but there was no response. They broke down the door and found David motionless, realizing immediately that he was dead. Initially, it was thought that David had taken his own life. However, during a routine inspection of the house, officers found a dropper in the kitchen trash, which seemed unusual. They then discovered 2 half-full glasses on the nightstand beside the bed where David lay. One contained a bright green liquid identified as antifreeze, and the other had cranberry juice. Under the bed, they found a container of antifreeze, a substance used to cool vehicles. Due to its high toxicity, it is considered very dangerous and is forbidden to ingest. It has a sweet smell and taste that attracts animals and sometimes children, so it must be stored carefully and disposed of properly to prevent accidental poisoning. The main ingredient in most antifreezes is ethylene glycol, a deadly toxin that converts into oxalic acid in the body, which enters the kidneys and crystallizes. Symptoms include weakness, nausea, seizures, tremors, lack of coordination, excessive thirst, rapid heart rate, and paralysis, often resulting in death. Detectives took the evidence from the room where David died for forensic analysis. Tests revealed fingerprints on the glass containing antifreeze that matched Stacy's. The positioning of the prints suggested that the widow had held the glass to David's mouth. DNA from David was also found on the dropper discarded in the trash and on the antifreeze container. Besides the scientific evidence, David's family and friends rejected the notion that he had taken his own life. Those who knew him, including his ex-wife Janice, dismissed the idea from the start. Additionally, investigators found it illogical that someone would drink poison and then dispose of the dropper in the trash. All indications pointed to something sinister behind David Castor's death. The case was assigned to a veteran detective who began a 2-year investigation. He immediately ordered covert surveillance of Stacy to observe her movements without her knowledge. Stacy had buried her second husband next to her first. Investigators set up surveillance cameras at the cemetery, hoping the widow would visit the graves and reveal suspicious behavior. But she never showed up. The detective also discovered that the deaths of Stacy's first and second husbands had distinctive similarities. According to their families, Michael and David had always been in good health, with no history of depression. However, some members of the investigation department wanted to close David's case as a self-inflicted death, while others wanted to continue the investigation. The only way to move forward was to revisit Stacy's past and investigate Michael's death, which involved exhuming his remains. Detectives obtained a court order to exhume Michael's body and conduct an autopsy. The forensic examination revealed crystals of antifreeze in the remains. It became clear to investigators that Stacy had killed both her husbands using the same method, a lethal dose of antifreeze. When the police interviewed their prime suspect, they were surprised. One of the detectives showed Stacy a photo of the nightstand and asked if the contents she poured into one of the glasses were cranberry juice. She responded nervously, mentioning that she had poured antifreeze but mispronounced the name of the substance. She had inadvertently uttered the word that would condemn her. Her brain hadn't lied. By the time Stacy realized her mistake, it was too late. She tried to correct herself, accusing the detective of trying to confuse her to incriminate her. She continued protesting, but the damage was done. Realizing she was caught, Stacy requested a lawyer. Meanwhile, the police decided to talk to Ashley. They waited for her to finish her first day of university classes and informed her that they had performed an autopsy on her father, Michael Wallace, discovering that he had been poisoned. Ashley later recounted that she broke down in tears and was furious when the officers told her they had exhumed Michael. It was difficult for Ashley to accept that her father's memory was being disturbed. She immediately called her mother, telling her everything in a distressed state. Stacy listened attentively. It's unclear what thoughts crossed her mind, but she invited her eldest daughter over to talk in detail while sharing some drinks. Given the horrible week she had had, Ashley agreed. As soon as she arrived at her mother's house, Stacy prepared a drink for her. After a few sips, Ashley passed out. The next day, Stacy promised they would drink together again after classes. Ashley accepted the second invitation and, as agreed, went to her mother's house after university. Stacy made her a cocktail that supposedly contained vodka and juice. Although Ashley noticed a strange taste, she drank it, trusting her mother completely. The following day, Bree found her sister Ashley unconscious and barely breathing. The teenager alerted her mother, shouting at her to call 911. While Stacy dialed emergency services, Bree found a note in Ashley's room, supposedly confessing to killing both her father and stepfather. Paramedics arrived within minutes and rushed Ashley to the nearest hospital. The doctors informed the family that if she had arrived 15 minutes later, she would not have survived. When Ashley regained consciousness, detectives questioned her about her suicide attempt and the note she had left. She was shocked and confused, assuring the officers that she had not tried to harm herself, nor had she confessed to killing anyone. Ashley recalled the last thing she remembered from that night was drinking the beverage her mother had given her, noting that it had tasted strange. The police had no further doubts and immediately arrested Stacy at the hospital on suspicion of attempting to kill her daughter and murdering her husband, David Castor. The investigation later revealed some of the calls Stacy made after learning about Michael's exhumation. In a conversation with a close friend, detectives overheard Stacy's concerns about the exhumation and her attempts to distance herself from the accusations. From the day Stacy was detained, the only person who believed in her innocence was her mother, Judy. Judy could not accept that her daughter had killed her two husbands and then tried to harm her own eldest daughter. She continued to blame anyone else for the crimes. On December 20th, 2007, Stacy was charged with second-degree murder, second-degree attempted murder, and conspiracy to present a falsified will. This last charge was because she had tried to alter David's will to exclude his eldest son, David Jr., from his first marriage. On September 25, 2008, 3 years after David's tragic death, the judge ruled that Michael's death could be presented as evidence in the trial. Stacy had hired a defense attorney who argued that Ashley was responsible for David's death and had also attempted to take her own life. On January 12, 2009, Stacy Castor's trial began. She faced an initial sentence of 25 years to life in prison. The jury heard testimony from over 50 witnesses and deliberated for 3 days. From the first day of the hearings, Stacy maintained that she was innocent of all charges. She claimed that David had taken his own life because he had been depressed for several days over his father's death and because they had argued the day before. A detective testified at the trial, detailing the results of the 2-year investigation. He explained that he had spoken with his colleagues about Michael's death to gather more information. They confirmed that there were certain similarities in the deaths of both husbands. He was told that when Stacy was interrogated before, she claimed Michael had various health problems. However, upon reviewing and consulting Michael's medical records, they found that the only significant issue he had in his 38 years was a hernia. During the trial, it was detailed that antifreeze poisoning is excruciatingly painful, indicating that both Michael and David likely suffered greatly in their final moments. A police officer highlighted that the forensic pathologist who performed Michael's autopsy after his exhumation reported finding antifreeze crystals in his remains. The detective also explained that in addition to surveillance cameras, they had wiretapped Stacy's phone. It was through one of these calls that they learned she had visited the cemetery a few days after Michael's body was exhumed. The county district attorney stated that investigations determined Ashley had consumed several cocktails prepared by her mother on September 12th and 13th, 2007. Ashley told them that the drinks tasted odd, and her mother gave her a straw to make drinking easier. She then felt dizzy and lay down. On the morning of September 14th, 2007, Bree found her sister nearly dead. When Stacy called 911, she told the operator that her eldest daughter had consumed alcohol and a significant number of pills. She also mentioned that Ashley had left a suicide note. The district attorney noted that the medical report on Ashley revealed a cocktail of various drugs, including Lexapro, had been crushed and mixed with vodka in her bloodstream. The jury was also informed that during her initial interviews, Stacy mispronounced the word antifreeze, and when they analyzed the supposed suicide note written by Ashley, they noticed the chemical name was misspelled in the same way. This led them to suspect that Stacy had written the note herself. This suspicion was confirmed by forensic computer examinations, which found 2 drafts of the letter in Stacy's deleted files. These drafts were created at times when Ashley was at university, ruling out the possibility that she had written them. Despite all the testimonies and evidence against her, Stacy continued to assert her innocence. She claimed that her only brush with the law had been a speeding ticket when she was 18. However, the most revealing testimony was yet to come. The prosecution called Ashley to the stand, whose declaration was devastating. She said she could not imagine that her own flesh and blood was sitting just feet away, claiming she had tried to take her own life. In a heated cross-examination, the prosecutor confronted Stacy with recorded phone calls obtained from the wiretap, as well as evidence extracted from her computer. The jury deliberated for 4 days. Finally, on February 5, 2009, Stacy Castor, 41, was found guilty of second-degree murder for the death of her husband, David Castor, as well as the attempted murder of her daughter, Ashley Wallace, and the forgery of David's will. A month later, she was sentenced to 51 years in prison and was incarcerated at a correctional facility for women. She would be eligible for parole at age 88. Stacy had no further contact with her daughters from the moment she was arrested at the hospital where Ashley was admitted. Despite the verdict, she continued to assert her innocence. In May 2009, during an interview for ABC News, she expressed her disbelief upon hearing the verdict. She described looking around, sitting down, and waiting for the moment to leave the courtroom. Before the ABC News cameras, she insisted she had not killed Michael or David and had not attempted to harm her daughter, stating she would never admit to something she did not do. For the television report, the reporter also spoke with Ashley, who declared that she hated Stacy for ruining so many lives but still loved her because she was her mother. Stacy appealed the guilty verdict. Her defense attorney spent nearly 2 years searching for evidence pointing to a different killer. Stacy suggested it was easy to blame wives for crimes against their partners but claimed children were also capable of such acts, pointing to news stories as evidence. She remained adamant that the truth would come to light, the evidence would prove her innocence, and she would eventually return home. But none of this happened. Judy visited her daughter every month in prison, maintaining Stacy's innocence. She also ceased contact with her 2 granddaughters. In an interview with ABC, Judy stated that if evidence ever emerged proving Ashley committed the crimes, she would apologize for the rest of her life. On the morning of June 11, 2016, after serving 7 years and 4 months of her sentence, Stacy Castor, dubbed the Black Widow by the media, was found dead in her cell at age 48. Authorities ruled out suicide. The autopsy revealed that Stacy had died of a heart attack. Ashley graduated from university with near-perfect grades. She and her sister continue to try to move forward with their lives. Regardless of the fact that there are fewer female killers than male, and irrespective of the motivations behind such crimes, the case of Stacy Castor gathered a series of circumstances that turned it into a scandal, capturing national attention for nearly a decade. The case of Chris Coleman a former Marine, met his wife Sherry, an Air Force member, while serving in the military. Sherry instantly fell in love with Chris and knew he was the one. They got married before their first child, Garrett, was born, as they were devout Christians. After Garrett's birth, they had their second son, Gavin. Gavin was more energetic and mischievous, unlike his laid-back father and brother. Chris and Sherry were devoted parents who cherished their children. Sherry protected them fiercely, while Chris enjoyed every moment with them. When Chris left the military, the family moved to Waterloo, Illinois, where Chris worked as the head of security for TV evangelist Joyce Meyer. Joyce's luxurious lifestyle sparked controversy, with critics accusing her of exploiting her followers' fears. Chris's job was to protect Joyce from threatening letters and hate mail. He worked as her bodyguard and earned a substantial salary, providing financial security for his family. However, his frequent travels with Joyce put a strain on his family as he was away from home for long periods. His sons deeply missed him, and his wife Sherry felt overwhelmed, underappreciated, and burdened with household responsibilities. In October 2008, Chris went to Florida, where his wife grew up, and met with an old friend, Tara Lintz, who gave him a tour of the city. Days later, Chris received a disturbing email from an address called Destroy Chris, warning him that he and his family would be in danger if he continued to work for Joyce Meyer. The ministry received more threatening emails specifying a time and date for the potential attack on Chris's family. The emails seemed to have inside information on Chris's schedule, including his upcoming trip abroad. Chris told Sherry about the threatening emails he had been receiving, and on the following Monday, he reported them to the local police. As Chris often worked away from home with Joyce Meyer Ministries, the police offered to increase patrols around their house during his absences. But this did little to alleviate Sherry's fear for her family's safety. Sherry's concern was so great that she once asked a friend to stay with her while Chris was away, as she didn't feel comfortable being alone in the house. She emphasized that she would do whatever it took to keep her family safe. 2 months into the threats, the Colemans received a disturbing, hand-delivered letter demanding that Chris publicly renounce his faith or face severe consequences. The letter's ominous tone left Sherry genuinely fearful for her family's safety. The threat had a profound impact on Sherry, and her fear grew daily. To respond to the threat, Chris and Sherry took extra precautions to protect their family, including installing surveillance cameras around their home, which captured footage of the surrounding area and sent it to a screen in their basement office. Chris hoped the cameras would help identify the person behind the threats. After the cameras were installed, the threats suddenly stopped and life returned to normal for the family. For a few months, everything seemed fine. However, in April 2009, the family received another disturbing letter warning that Sherry's worst fears were about to come true. Chris was deeply disturbed by the letter's ominous tone. After reviewing the security footage, Chris was shocked to see a mysterious silhouette. Although the figure's identity remained unknown, its presence reignited Chris's concerns for his family's safety. The renewed sense of fear led to increased police efforts to protect the Coleman family. Detective Sergeant Justin Barlow from the Columbia Police Department took a particular interest in the case and offered to help the family. He set up video cameras to monitor the Coleman's driveway, but unfortunately, they did not catch the person behind the threats. On May 5, 2009, Chris went to the gym and then called his home phone to check on Sherry and the boys, making sure they were up and getting ready for school. Chris called for help, but no one responded. Concerned, he phoned his neighbor, Detective Justin Barlow, at 6:45 a.m. Chris told Barlow that he had left for the gym in St. Louis County around 5:30 a.m. and had been trying to reach his wife Sherry, but she wasn't answering her phone. Worried, Chris asked Barlow to check on Sherry and their sons. Barlow grabbed his gear, including his weapon, handcuffs, flashlight, and radio, and headed to the Coleman house. As he waited for backup to arrive, his priority was to make contact with Sherry and ensure everyone's safety. With a mix of hope and unease, Barlow approached the door and knocked firmly, hoping someone would respond. When Detective Justin Barlow arrived at the Coleman home, the eerie silence and darkness made him feel uneasy. The lack of movement and lights inside the house heightened his sense of unease. Minutes later, A patrol vehicle arrived with another officer to assist him. The second officer went to the back of the house to try to see or communicate with Sherry or the boys through a window or door. Instead, he found signs of forced entry into the basement, which immediately grabbed Detective Barlow's attention. He became deeply concerned for Sherry Garrett and Gavin's safety. Detective Barlow and the second officer decided to enter the house through the basement, announcing their presence as they went. But they received no response. During their thorough search of the basement, they found a disconnected video cable at the computer desk. This discovery led them to believe that the camera's digital video recorder was missing. Detective Justin Barlow and the second officer searched the Coleman home from the basement up, noticing a strong smell of aerosol spray paint that grew stronger as they climbed the stairs. On the main level, they found the walls painted with derogatory messages targeting Chris, Sherry, and their sons. 13 minutes after Chris called the detective, Chris returned home from the gym and was told to wait outside while the officers searched the house. He complied, sitting quietly on the porch without asking questions or trying to enter. Meanwhile, a third officer arrived and the three of them searched the rest of the house for Sherry and the boys. On the upper floors, they found more hate-filled spray-painted messages. When they reached the second story, Detective Barlow entered the bedroom of Garrett, the oldest son, where he appeared to be asleep. However, upon closer inspection, the detective realized that Garrett was dead, with no signs of life and a cold body. Ligature marks around his neck indicated that he had been murdered. Detectives' minds were shocked when they found Garrett's lifeless body. Next door, the second officer entered to check on Gavin and was horrified to discover the boy was also dead, strangled with ligature marks around his neck, just like his brother. The gruesome scene was made even more disturbing by an obscene message spray-painted on the bedsheets. In the master bedroom, the third officer found Sherry's lifeless body on the bed, her hair covering her face. It was clear she had been murdered. As the officer examined the room, he noticed Sherry's body had several bruises, indicating she had fought back and tried to defend herself. And her sons. After discovering the bodies of Sherry, Garrett, and Gavin, detectives including Justin Barlow heard Chris enter the house, having waited outside for news about his family. Detective Barlow took Chris outside to give him some privacy to process the news. However, as the reality of the situation sank in, Chris' reaction was intense. He felt sick, collapsed, and curled up into a fetal position, unable to contain his emotions. The shock of the brutal murders was too much for him to comprehend. Chris was in disbelief that his family had been taken away in such a violent manner. In desperation, he tried to reach out to his father, Ronald, telling him that something had happened to Sherry and the boys. Ronald immediately realized that Chris was in shock upon receiving the news. Ronald was stunned by the tragedy that had befallen his family. The shocking news of the murders of Sherry Garrett and Gavin spread quickly throughout the community of Waterloo, Illinois, where the Coleman family lived. As the neighbors learned of the tragedy, they were left devastated and terrified. Chris expressed remorse for leaving his family alone to go to the gym. But when asked if he had any idea who might have committed the crime, he claimed to have no clue. Nevertheless, Detective Barlow noticed several suspicious behaviors during the interview. One red flag was Chris' lack of curiosity about the details of his family's murder, which seemed unusual given the gravity of the situation. The detective noticed Chris trying to hide scratches on his arms during the interview, even using a blanket to conceal them despite the warm temperature. The scratches were suspicious because they suggested Chris had been in a physical struggle, similar to Sherry's fight with her killer. When asked about the scratches, Chris claimed they came from installing a satellite dish the day before. He denied having an affair during the police interview, but did admit to a close friendship with Tara, a cocktail waitress and high school friend of his wife's who lived in Florida. Chris said his conversations with Tara were innocent, but wouldn't have been approved by his wife. He insisted he would never consider leaving his family for Tara. However, when detectives contacted Tara, her story contradicted Chris. She revealed that they had been having an affair since November 2008. Tara provided evidence from her phone and laptop, including emails, explicit pictures, and videos that exposed the true nature of their relationship. When detectives confronted Chris with the information Tara had provided, he admitted to seeing her more frequently than he initially told them. Further investigation revealed that Chris and Tara had a secret arrangement to meet at locations where Chris worked for Joyce Meyer. They would sneak away together, often to exotic destinations like Hawaii, to spend time together without their family's knowledge. Although Chris claimed that his relationship with Tara was not an affair, detectives found evidence on Tara's phone and computer that suggested otherwise. Tara had marked a wedding to Chris on her calendar, as well as planned vacations with him, indicating that she believed Chris intended to leave his family for her. The detectives were suspicious of Chris because the evidence contradicted his claim that his relationship with Tara was casual. Chris' father, Ronald, was shocked to learn about the affair, but he firmly believed that it was unrelated to the murders of Chris' wife and son. According to Ronald, Chris was a gentle person who was not capable of such brutal crimes. Ronald described Chris as a quiet individual who showed no signs of violence. However, the detectives thought that Chris' affair with Tara was a strong motive for the murders. Despite this, their initial investigation did not find enough evidence to charge Chris with the crime. After being questioned for 6 hours, Chris was released without being charged. Tara became a person of interest in the investigation, but she was eventually cleared as a suspect when it was discovered that she was in Florida on the morning of May 5, 2009, when the murders occurred. The Coleman family murders led to one of the largest murder investigations in Illinois history. A special team of 25 detectives was formed to catch the person who killed the Coleman family. They worked extremely long hours, often 20 hours a day, for 15 days straight, calling in experts to help with the case. One of their main goals was to find out who sent the hateful emails to Chris Coleman. They carefully looked at every threatening email sent to Joyce Meyer Ministries over the past year, which led them to investigate leads all over the country. The team tracked down and talked to every person who sent threatening emails, but none of them seemed to be responsible for the murder. A team of computer experts was then brought in to help investigate the crime. The detectives hoped they could find some digital evidence related to the murder. The computer experts started by looking at the email account, Diris. They found that the email address was created on November 14, 2008, just a few days before the first threatening email was sent. One surprising thing they discovered was that the death threats sent to Chris Coleman's family came from Chris's own computer IP address. The detectives thoroughly examined the spray-painted messages at the crime scene and compared them to Christopher Coleman's handwriting to gather evidence. They took photos of the messages and collected handwriting samples from Coleman, which were then sent to a specialist for analysis. The expert's comparison of the two samples revealed a match, indicating that Christopher Coleman had written the messages on his home's walls on the day of the murders. Further analysis identified the specific brand and color of spray paint used, Rust-Oleum Candy Apple Red. After learning that Chris Coleman had bought something from a hardware store just days before his family's murder, a detective contacted the store's manager. The manager confirmed the purchase and revealed that Chris had bought Rust-Oleum Candy Apple Red spray paint, the same type found at the crime scene. This discovery was crucial because it established a link between Chris and the murder. The timeline of the murder was also important. Chris initially claimed to have left his house around 5:45 a.m. on May 5, 2009, but the medical examiner determined that the murders occurred around 3 a.m., which meant Chris was at home when his family was killed. 2 weeks after the bodies were found, Chris Coleman was arrested and charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder. The prosecution argued that Chris's motivations were greed, selfishness, and narcissism, and that he wanted a fresh start, but his family was standing in the way. In April 2011, Chris Coleman stood trial for the murders of his wife, Sherry, and their 2 sons, Garrett and Gavin. The prosecution argued that Chris killed his family to be with another woman, Tara, as he would lose his well-paying job with Joyce Meyer Ministries if he divorced Sherry, since the organization does not condone divorce. Chris's defense attorney claimed that an intruder entered the Coleman's home on May 5, 2009, and committed the murders. However, 2 years later, on the anniversary of the murders, Chris was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison without parole, despite being eligible for a death sentence. The judge's decision was influenced by the recent repeal of the death penalty in Illinois, which would take effect a few months later. Sherry's loved ones wanted to keep her, Garrett and Gavin's memory alive and decided to raise funds for victims of domestic violence, a cause close to their hearts. Chad Brandon Amelia was born on September 27, 1991 in Santa Clarita, a city located north of Los Angeles, California. His father, Sean Amelia, an Irish construction supervisor, and his mother, Michelle, separated when Chad was just 5 years old. Despite their separation, they worked hard to ensure Chad had a happy childhood. According to those close to him, Chad was a kind young man with a bright smile and boundless energy. He had a great sense of humor and was always responsible and dedicated. His friends saw him as the big brother of the group, always looking out for them without expecting anything in return. Chad developed a passion for American football at a young age and played throughout his teenage years. He continued playing while attending Chico State University, where he studied accounting and eventually graduated. After graduation, Chad moved to an apartment in Thousand Oaks, part of the greater Los Angeles area, taking his dog, Athena, with him. He shared the apartment with a young man named Vinny Oliveira. Alongside working at an accounting firm, Chad was studying to obtain his Certified Public Accountant (CPA) certificate. However, his busy days left him with insufficient sleep at night, leading him to develop a habit of using cannabis to help him sleep. According to Vinny, Chad was often intoxicated when seen at the apartment. Chad didn't hide this from others, and even his parents were aware of his cannabis use. Although they didn't approve, they didn't see it as the worst thing he could be doing. Sean explained in an interview that Chad never smoked when visiting him because he knew Sean disliked. Sean considered cannabis a dirty substance with a foul smell that changed Chad's personality and decreased his motivation and concentration. Little did Sean expect that Chad's addiction to cannabis would dramatically change his life, all because of a woman he barely knew. Brin Spoucher was born on January 25, 1991 in Chicago, Illinois. From a very young age, Brin faced serious health issues that required numerous surgeries and strong medications. These medical procedures and medications severely deteriorated her hearing. At 4 years old, she began using cochlear implants to hear better and also learned to read lips. Her medical condition made her feel isolated and different from others. Throughout her schooling, she was often the only student with hearing loss and would hide her hearing aids to fit in and avoid teasing. As she grew older, she decided to turn this aspect of herself that once embarrassed her into a strength. Brin pursued a doctorate in audiology at the University of Washington School of Medicine, graduating in the 2010s. She excelled in her field, with one professor stating that out of the thousands of graduate students he had taught, Brin stood out as brilliant and none could surpass her. In August 2017, at the age of 26, Brin moved to Thousand Oaks and secured a job as an audiologist at UCLA Health, a health system comprising various medical centers, including the David Geffen School of Medicine at UCLA. For almost a year, she lived in a rental apartment that didn't allow pets, so she had to leave her Siberian Husky, Arya, with her family in Illinois. It wasn't until April 2018 that she found a place where she could bring her beloved canine companion. Having Arya by her side again significantly improved Brin's daily life, as she had trained the dog as a service animal 2 years earlier when Arya was just a puppy. Brin often took Arya for walks at Kenaho Creek, a popular park in Thousand Oaks. It was there, at her favorite spot, that she met Chad in late April 2018. According to her account, Chad was the one who initially approached her. On several occasions when their paths crossed, the 26-year-old Chad asked for her phone number, but she declined each time. Eventually, Chad handed her his business card so she could text him if she ever wanted to meet up. That's exactly what Brin did, and soon they began an informal relationship. They would go out to eat or hang out with friends, and once, they shared a bottle of Irish whiskey while watching their dogs play in the park. Brin was drawn to Chad's sarcastic humor, which contrasted with his kind and sweet personality. She expressed that although she wasn't sure they'd get along at first, she soon realized they fit together like puzzle pieces. On Sunday, May 27, 2018, the day before Memorial Day, Brin went out drinking with some friends. Chad contacted her later, inviting her to visit. Around 10:30 p.m., the 27-year-old Brin arrived at Chad's place with Arya. They spent time together, drinking a bit and chatting with Chad's roommate Vinny. Shortly after midnight, Chad took out his water pipe and loaded it with cannabis. He went out to the balcony to smoke alone, but Brin soon joined him and asked for a hit. After inhaling, all she felt was a burning sensation in her throat, which made her cough. She told Chad that she had never had good experiences with cannabis, as she never felt its effects as others describe. Surprised, Chad loaded the pipe again with even more cannabis, encouraging her to try again to feel the effects. Brin complied and smoked again. What happened next was so horrific it seemed like fiction. In the early hours of May 28th, the Thousand Oaks police responded to an emergency call made by Vinny. Something terrible was happening at the residence and they needed immediate help. When officers arrived, their body cameras captured the violent scene unfolding inside the apartment. Brin had savagely attacked Chad with several sharp objects taken from the kitchen and then turned one on herself. The footage is so graphic it has not been released to the public. In an attempt to stop her, officers fired a taser 4 times, but Brin seemed unaffected by the electric shocks. They then used their batons, striking her 9 times until she finally dropped the weapon. Brin suffered 5 fractures in one arm and deep cuts on her neck, face, and right hand. She had also attacked her dog, Arya, who fortunately survived. Tragically, Chad was not as lucky. By the time police arrived, he was already lifeless on the floor with a total of 108 wounds across his body, as later revealed by the forensic report. Brin was rushed to the hospital and immediately taken into surgery to save her life. The procedure was successful, and she was admitted to the same health center for recovery. Investigators wasted no time and questioned Brin as soon as she regained consciousness, still intubated and unable to speak. She responded in writing, briefly recounting that she had told Chad she didn't want to smoke anymore, but he had forced her to do so. This response led detectives to believe that Brin did not remember her actions, a revelation they decided to share with her a few days later. Once Brin had sufficiently recovered from her injuries, she was arrested and charged with homicide. The aftermath of the incident impacted not only Brin, but also her victim and their families. It was Chad's father, Sean, who had to break the tragic news to his ex-wife, Michelle. In an interview, the grieving father chose not to disclose how he delivered the news, as the memory was too painful to revisit. However, he did share that he requested the police allow him to personally inform Michelle, wanting to be there to console and support her. He recalled seeing the moment her soul shattered as he spoke the words. From that moment, Michelle fell into deep depression. Sean reflected that losing a child brings overwhelming guilt and makes one doubt if happiness is ever possible again. This was Michelle's experience compounded by her type 2 diabetes. After the funeral, she felt she had no right to smile. She refused to let loved ones take photos of her looking happy, believing it would be disrespectful to her mourning and her son. This mindset led her to neglect her health, ceasing her medical treatment. 18 months after Chad's death, Michelle passed away from severe cardiac dysfunction. Tragically, she did not live to see the conclusion of Brin's trial. Though it's impossible to know, it's likely the delay between the last hearing and the sentencing of the person responsible for her son's death would have caused her even more pain. Sean explained in later interviews that shortly after the legal proceedings against Brin began, he started receiving notifications that the defense had requested extensions, claiming they needed more time to prepare for trial. These messages arrived at least every 6 months. This situation dragged on for over 5 years, also impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. Thus, the first trial hearing did not occur until November 9, 2023. During this initial proceeding, Brin, fully recovered from her injuries, had the opportunity to testify before the jury and those present in the courtroom. The then 32-year-old woman, equipped with a real-time transcription monitor on both the witness stand and the defendant's bench, shared her story. Brin recounted her life before describing the events of May 27, 2018. She stated that after encouraging her to smoke a second time, Chad got up to fetch the water pipe. Once loaded, he brought it to her face, insisting she inhale immediately to feel the effects. Brin explained she felt she couldn't refuse him, admitting he hadn't used physical force, but his persistence frightened her. She revealed that Chad did not always exhibit the sweet demeanor others attributed to him and that she had seen him in bad moods, which pressured her into compliance. According to Brin, minutes later she began to feel as if they were trapped in a time loop. The conversation with Chad seemed to repeat endlessly, giving her a constant sense of déjà vu. She lost the ability to form coherent sentences, which caused her anxiety. Seeking relief, she went back inside, lay down on the couch and closed her eyes to calm herself. She then reported hearing voices in her head and seeing things with her eyes closed that were clearly not there, all while feeling trapped in a never-ending cycle. At some point, Brin felt she had died, believing she was trapped inside her own corpse. She described seeing and hearing her loved ones mourning her, even feeling hands touching her body. This wasn't the most bizarre experience of that night. She claimed to have had an out-of-body experience, seeing her own body lying on the couch from above. She added that Chad was beside her, crying uncontrollably, and paramedics were attempting to revive her. Before continuing, Brin clarified that what happened next felt as if she were in a movie, viewing events from the perspective of one of the characters, as if it were happening to someone else, not her. She recounted pushing the chairs aside in the apartment to make her way to the kitchen, where she grabbed 2 knives and threw them forcefully at Chad. She then took 2 more knives and approached one of the dogs, attacking it. Brin thought she heard Chad ask why she had hurt Athena, but later learned it was Arya. She then walked to where Chad was standing, and just as she raised the knife against him, she lost consciousness completely. Despite this, she continued hearing voices in her head, urging her not to stop. She also heard Vinny, who ran out of the apartment to call the authorities. The hallucinations persisted for what felt like hours, becoming so intense that she ended up cutting her own neck with the knife. After that, everything went black again. Eventually, Brin regained consciousness, though not fully and not for long. It was not a slow, gradual process, but quite the opposite. She felt the electric shocks from the police taser used to make her drop the knife, and in her delirium, she thought they were using a defibrillator to resuscitate her. She recalled waking up in the hospital when authorities began asking her about what had happened. However, her memories were blurry, and she couldn't distinguish what was real from what she had hallucinated. It wasn't until 2 days later that investigators informed her she had killed Chad. The defense attorney referenced tests conducted on the water pipe after the incident and called another person to explain the results. The expert stated that drug detection tests are not 100% reliable, as some substances might not be immediately identifiable. He asserted that while the report clearly indicated the presence of THC, the main psychoactive component of cannabis, there was a significant possibility the weed had been laced with something else. This was even more probable if Chad had purchased it from an illegal vendor who might add other substances to enhance effects and reduce costs, despite recreational marijuana being legal in California at that time. Brin's legal team also highlighted that until then, it had been overlooked that Vinny, Chad's roommate, had smoked the same substance earlier and also experienced hallucinations. Based on this, Brin's defense portrayed her as an innocent woman with little experience in substance use, who couldn't have known what she was smoking when coerced into it. This was corroborated by testimonies from her acquaintances. Old friends from high school testified that she was never interested in drugs, which was why she had cut ties with some people. A 33-year-old woman named Amy Carriwick, who met Brin in 2007, mentioned they bonded over shared interests in high school. She noted that while Brin played basketball, she played softball, and they both enjoyed activities typically unpopular among girls like camping and hiking. Brin first smoked marijuana in 2014 when she started dating a man named Kevin, with whom she had a 3-year relationship. The couple took a joint to a mountain campsite in Washington and decided after smoking that it wasn't for them. Kevin, a personal trainer and ex-Marine, believed Chad could have coerced her into smoking that night. He explained that they broke up in 2017 when Brin moved to California, but described her as carefree, charismatic, and pleasant. It was logical for the defense attorneys to base their strategy on these arguments, as California's penal code stipulates that individuals under the influence of drugs or alcohol are fully responsible for their actions unless they were forced or deceived into intoxication. Despite their efforts, the jury ultimately rejected this argument. The statement Brin had given to the police while still hospitalized became the primary issue facing the prosecutor and the defense. The accused had initially provided a written statement confessing that she had voluntarily taken the second hit from Chad's pipe. She claimed this document had been concealed from the prosecution for a time. Moreover, in one of the hearings, the prosecutor unveiled new evidence that could potentially turn the trial around. She portrayed Brin in a starkly different light than the defense did, supporting her argument with a series of text messages exchanged in 2018 between Brin and several friends. In these communications, Brin referenced getting so drunk that she had to miss work the next day and mentioned consuming cannabis-infused foods. This served as a basis for the prosecutor to question not only Brin's original statement, but also all her testimonies. The prosecutor emphasized that Brin had not mentioned to investigators or doctors that she had been pressured or intimidated during most of her interviews. Brin responded to both allegations. She explained that she tended to exaggerate her experiences when talking to friends, but had never been so drunk as to black out or miss work due to a hangover. She added that she had only been late to work once after a night out drinking. Regarding the interrogations, Brin stated she hadn't shared all the information with the police in each interview because she assumed the detectives already knew everything after repeating the same answers multiple times. To counter the prosecution's claims, the defense hired mental health experts who determined that Brin had not suffered from any mental illness, problems, or violent tendencies before the attack, suggesting that a marijuana-induced psychotic episode was the only explanation for her actions. This argument undermined the prosecutor's case, leading the jury to reduce the charge. On December 1, 2023, after 4 hours of deliberation, Brin was found guilty of involuntary manslaughter instead of the initial charge of murder. The verdict was a shock to the victim's family and friends. On January 22, 2024, the day before the sentencing hearing, they gathered in front of the county government building, demanding a sentence fitting the severity of Brin's crimes. On January 23, 2024, the courtroom was filled with spectators, journalists, and family members. The room was so crowded that staff had to place people in the jury box and even had some standing in the aisle. Amid sobs, Brin took the stand one last time to apologize to Chad's family, especially his father, who had endured the ordeal without the support of Chad's mother. However, the most emotional moment of the hearing came when Chad's paternal grandmother read a statement she had written. The elderly woman addressed Brin, expressing forgiveness for what she had done, adding that if she couldn't forgive her, God wouldn't forgive her either. After nearly 6 years of waiting, the judge sentenced Brin to 2 years of probation instead of the 5 years in prison she faced after being found guilty in December 2023. As part of her punishment, she was required to complete 100 hours of community service to raise awareness about cannabis-induced psychosis. She was warned that violating the terms of her probation could result in imprisonment. Following the verdict, Sean criticized the judge for what he perceived as a biased decision influenced by the defendant's gender and race. He also expressed concern about the message this decision sent regarding marijuana use, feeling it gave consumers a green light to justify illegal actions. Lastly, he suggested that Brin should be hospitalized for psychiatric evaluation to study her brain's unique chemistry, believing that the drug alone wasn't the sole cause of the alleged psychotic episode and hoping an investigation might clarify it. The prosecutor voiced her concerns about the precedent set by the judge's decision, describing the sentence as a mockery of the criminal justice system. She considered this case marked as involuntary manslaughter, one of the most atrocious and violent cases in her 29-year career seeking justice. The tragic end of Chad and the lenient sentence given to Brin sparked a debate on recreational cannabis use. A famous forensic psychiatrist noted that the increasing acceptance of cannabis in society led to misinformation about its associated risks. He pointed to various studies showing a clear link between cannabis use and psychosis, though he admitted it doesn't occur in 100% of cases. As the legal system faced criticism for its handling of the case, society reflected on the risks associated with cannabis use, questioning whether marijuana is truly a catalyst for violence or merely a trigger among a broader set of circumstances or pre-existing medical conditions. The case of Kelly Cochran. Christopher Reagan was born and raised in Detroit, Michigan, where he spent his early years. At the age of 20, he decided to serve his country and join the military. Christopher committed himself to protecting the peace and safety of his fellow citizens. Christopher was stationed at a military base near Marquette, where he met Terry O'Donnell, a young teacher from Iron River. They lived in the same area and would often see each other around town as they spent more time together. They remained close friends for many years, but Christopher eventually decided to leave the military and move to Traverse City. Despite the distance between them, they continued to communicate regularly, and in December 2012, Christopher asked Terry to take their relationship to the next level. Terry and Christopher have known each other for many years. They find they have a lot in common. They decide to live together. Terry and Christopher choose Iron River as the perfect place for them to settle down. Christopher finds a job at a factory that makes parts for military ships, where he becomes a supervisor. However, after 2 years of living together, problems began to arise in their relationship. Unfortunately, they didn't make an effort to work through their issues, and it became clear that their relationship was coming to an end. Eventually, they made the difficult decision to go their separate ways. Despite the breakup, they were able to part on good terms and remain friends. After breaking up with Terry, Christopher realized that he couldn't live in her house anymore, so he decided to rent his own house. He felt that the town he lived in was too small, and he wanted a more dynamic city. Christopher began applying for jobs in various locations, sending out his resume in search of a new job. In October 2014, Christopher found a job in Asheville, North Carolina. As Christopher settled into his new life in Asheville, he contacted Terry on October 14th, telling her that he would be taking the day off tomorrow and looking forward to meeting Terry for a walk. However, on October 15th, Christopher did not contact Terry as planned. Terry became worried and tried calling him for several days, but he did not answer. She even contacted their mutual friends. 10 days after Christopher went missing, Terry filed a police report. The police accepted the report and told Terry that Christopher had probably moved to a new job in North Carolina and that he had started a new life and wanted to contact old friends. To avoid speculation, investigators conducted a thorough investigation. They identified Christopher's new workplace and contacted an employee to gather information. However, surprisingly, they found out that Christopher had not shown up to work in 10 days. The police then suspected that he might have been involved in an accident, given his frequent solo outdoor trips. The search for Christopher led investigators to the local woods where he was known to frequent. Trained search dogs were brought in to aid in the effort, but no signs of Christopher were found. Terry, concerned that Christopher may have been injured or in an accident, suggested searching his former apartment. The investigators agreed and visited the apartment where they were met with a scene of disarray. Clothes and belongings were scattered across the floor and closets were left open. Initially, they thought that Christopher might have simply been messy, but Terry disputed this, stating that Christopher was typically neat and organized. The detectives started to suspect a connection between the recent events and the crime. After investigating Christopher's home, they decided to expand their search. A thorough search of the neighborhood led them to find Christopher's car 8 miles outside Iron River near the city limits. The police found it unusual that the car was left there, suggesting it might have been abandoned unintentionally. After forcing open a door, they searched the interior and found nothing suspicious, only ordinary clothing. However, one of the officers noticed a small yellow piece of paper on the front passenger seat with a detailed route written on it. They decided to follow the route to see where it led. Although the paper did not specify an exact address, the directions were clear. According to Terry, Christopher, although familiar with the city of Iron River, did not know the local street names, so he wrote down the directions using landmarks such as bus stops and gas stations. Terry deduced from the detailed notes that this was Christopher's first time visiting the location. The detectives followed the route outlined on the paper, which led them to a nearby town and a specific house mentioned in Christopher's notes. When they arrived, They knocked on the door to gather information and Christopher's connection to the location. A man named Jason Cochran answered the door, and his wife Kelly was there. The police explained that they were investigating Christopher's disappearance and had found a lead pointing to this address. Terry, who worked with Christopher at the same factory, revealed that they were co-workers. She had tried to contact Christopher via text message in mid-October but had not received a response. Investigators found a note in Christopher's car that showed the route to Jason's house. Although confused, Jason and Kelly agreed to cooperate with the investigation. After a short interrogation without any further clues, the detectives left Jason Cochran's house. Detectives then interviewed Christopher's co-workers at the factory. A supervisor shared that Christopher had been having an affair with Kelly Cochran, which was an open secret among employees. This revelation sparked interest, leading investigators to re-question that Jason and Kelly. During reinterrogation, Kelly confessed to her relationship with Christopher. However, she claimed that she could not reveal this information earlier because her husband Jason was present. According to Kelly, Jason agreed to her affair. However, Christopher's colleagues disputed Kelly's story. They claimed that Jason did not approve of Kelly's affair. When Jason was later brought in for questioning, he completely denied approving of Kelly's affair. His strong objection to Kelly's infidelity aroused suspicion and made him a suspect. The investigation into Christopher's disappearance was ongoing, but the lack of concrete evidence made it impossible to determine whether Kelly was involved. As a result, Kelly and Jason were released from the police station. The case remained unsolved for 5 months. In March 2015, a new investigator, Detective Jeremy Ogden from the Hobart Police Department, took over the case. Jeremy Ogden began by thoroughly examining the Jason Cochran family's background. Kelly and Jason had met in high school and started living together soon after graduation. They had distinct personalities. Kelly was outgoing, sociable, and talkative, while Jason was quiet and reserved. He rarely initiated conversations, only responding to questions asked of him. Despite their differences, they decided to get married. After the wedding, they started a business together, providing swimming pool maintenance services. The business was modest, but it provided a decent income for they. Jason handled most of the pool maintenance work, but the constant stress and physical strain took a toll on his health. He began to experience back problems and felt increasingly heavier every day. Eventually, he realized he could no longer continue running the business. Kelly then took over the responsibilities of running the business, hoping that Jason would soon recover and return to his duties. However, his condition continued to worsen, and medical treatments were not providing the desired relief. Searched for alternative ways to help her husband recover. During her search, Kelly discovered a plant that offered hope for Jason's recovery. However, the plant was banned in their home state, making it inaccessible to them. To access the treatment, Kelly and Jason decided to relocate to Michigan, specifically Iron River Township, in 2014. Jason consulted his doctor and received a prescription for pain medication. Around the same time, in early 2014, Jason's wife, Kelly Cochran, started working at a factory that manufactured parts for U.S. warships. Kelly and Jason moved to the area. Kelly and Jason worked at the same factory where Christopher Reagan worked. Christopher and Kelly found common topics of conversation and over time became close friends. This friendship was especially important to Christopher. After gathering evidence, prosecutors presented their case to a Michigan judge to obtain a search warrant for Kelly and Jason's home. The judge granted the warrant, and on March 6th, a team of investigators searched Kelly and Jason's home, carefully searching for any evidence related to Christopher's disappearance. The only significant discovery was a book written by Jason. He used a pseudonym in the world of video games. The title of the work was ordinary, but its content was horrifying. In this dark and violent book, Jason described the murder of the person who had harmed him. After reading the book, the detectives noticed a character who bore an uncanny resemblance to Christopher. This raised suspicions about Jason, leading them to wonder if he had been inspired by the real-life crimes he had committed. 3 weeks later, a second search of Jason's home was conducted. The police hoped to find crucial evidence that had been missed in the first search. However, when they arrived at the Jasons' home, they found it empty with no cars in sight. Repeated attempts to knock on the door went unanswered. It was later discovered that Kelly and Jason had fled the state shortly after the initial search, moving to Indiana. Their sudden departure left investigators concerned. Michigan police, needing a DNA sample, asked Indiana police for help. Indiana police went to Jason's new home, where they had just moved. The investigation into Christopher Reagan's disappearance ran out of clues. Time passed, and on February 22, 2016, Hobart, Indiana, police received a frantic call from Kelly Cochran, who tried to explain that her husband, Jason, was not breathing. When paramedics arrived, Kelly was in a panic. It was clear that Jason was beyond saving. He was sitting in a chair, his face burning like fire, as if he had overheated. The doctors officially confirmed Jason's death. His body was then sent for a thorough forensic examination. Meanwhile, Kelly was handed over to a police patrol and taken to relatives who lived nearby. To piece together what happened, investigators thoroughly searched the Jasons' new home. During the search, a police officer found a syringe at the foot of Jason in his wife's bed. Initially, investigators believed Jason's death was due to substance abuse. The medical examiner's report showed that Jason had multiple drugs in his system, but Jason's death was due to strangulation, confirmed by bruises on his neck and face. The focus of the investigation then shifted to Kelly Cochran, who appeared to be connected to both crimes. She was now considered the prime suspect in not only Christopher's disappearance, but also her husband's murder. On February 23, 2016, Kelly Cochran was summoned to the police station to answer questions about her husband's death. Under direct questioning and pressure from investigators, Kelly denied any involvement in her husband's death and Christopher's disappearance. She claimed that Jason's death was due to a drug overdose. Months later, investigators still lacked concrete evidence to convict Kelly. During the investigation, Detective Jeremy Ogden met Walter Hammerman, a close friend of Jason's. Kelly informed Walter of Jason's death, who then contacted the police. Walter shared his insights with investigators, saying he did not believe Jason's death was caused by drugs. He claimed that Jason had used herbs to relieve his chronic back pain. In March of the previous year, Jason confided in Walter about his concerns. Jason and Kelly were asked to go to Indiana because the Iron River police suspected them of being involved in Christopher's disappearance. This had a significant impact on Jason, leading to depression. Walter observed the notable change in Jason's behavior, with Kelly increasingly taking control over his life. Jason appeared to be constantly anxious, and he began to avoid social gatherings as soon as Kelly returned from work. As the investigation progressed, this information became a vital link. After the medical examiner determined that Jason had died from strangulation, Detective Ogden devised a plan to pressure Kelly into revealing the truth about Jason's death. Walter, Jason's friend, was used as bait to lure Kelly into a trap. On March 12, 2016, Walter, under police surveillance and equipped with a listening device, called Kelly. He told her that Jason had given him a letter containing important information before his death, with the condition that it be sent to the police if anything happened to him. However, Kelly surprisingly asked Walter to drop the idea, which caught both Walter and the police off guard. Despite this development, the detective still lacked direct evidence to build a case. In the weeks following her initial questioning, Kelly was subjected to multiple interrogations by investigators trying to uncover the truth. Despite their efforts, she continued to deny any wrongdoing. However, on April 26, 2016, it became apparent that Kelly Cochran had evaded the scrutiny of investigators and was on the loose. Detectives joined forces with police officers from Iron River and Hobart to launch a federal manhunt for Kelly Cochran. Walter Hammerman, who had cooperated with the police, was shocked and frightened by the news. He feared that Kelly might never be caught and could potentially harm him again. As the search for Kelly intensified, her phone went off, leading investigators to believe she was deliberately concealing her location. Kelly evaded police and fled to Wingo, Kentucky, over 6 hours away from Hobart. A detective notified the local authorities to exercise extreme caution if they found Kelly. Police in Wingo identified Kelly at her cousin's house on April 28th. Understanding that she posed a potential danger and was prone to attempting to escape, officers rapidly proceeded to the residence, avoiding advance warnings that afternoon and detaining Kelly on site. During the interview, Kelly revealed new details. That Kelly was deeply in love with Jason and wanted to leave the city life behind to start over with him. On October 13, 2015, Jason discovered Kelly's infidelity. Jason made a dark pact. The adulterer was obliged to kill his lover if the affair was exposed. Kelly claimed she had never taken this pact seriously, thinking it was just a joke. However, Jason was resolute and warned Kelly that if she didn't fulfill her end of the bargain, he would take matters into his own hands. Despite her reservations, Kelly reluctantly helped Jason commit a heinous crime. The next evening, October 14, 2015, Christopher arrived at Kelly's house, eager to spend a romantic evening with Christopher while her husband was away. Kelly had planned a fun evening, complete with dinner and intimacy. Kelly and Christopher had dinner together and then went upstairs to the house. Then Jason suddenly appeared. Jason rushed into the bedroom holding a rifle. Christopher immediately realized that he was in danger. Without hesitation, Jason shot Christopher in the head, killing him. Jason and Kelly then dragged the body down to the basement, where they began to dismember it with a hacksaw. Jason and Kelly cut Christopher's limbs and head off his body and placed the remains in several garbage bags. They then dumped the bags in the woods near Crystal Falls. To avoid suspicion, they drove Christopher's car away from the house. Kelly and Jason thoroughly cleaned the house to remove any evidence of the crime. Kelly was consumed by a deep-seated anger towards her husband, whom she blamed for ruining her chance at happiness with he she truly loved, Christopher. She couldn't forgive her husband for depriving her of the opportunity to be with him, and the pain and loss she felt lingered every day. Kelly's resentment towards her husband eventually turned to hatred, and she knew she could no longer live peacefully with him. An opportunity for revenge presented itself on February 22, 2016, when her husband complained of back pain. Kelly convinced him to let her give her an injection, but she deliberately gave him a dose that killed him. However, the medication didn't work as planned, and her husband was still breathing. Kelly then suffocated him by covering his mouth and nose with her hands. To ensure he was dead, she also squeezed his neck, which explained the bruises found on his body. After confessing to the crime, Kelly cooperated with the police to help them locate Christopher's remains. On May 18, 2016, Detective Jeremy Ogden led a team to a remote area near Crystal Falls to search for Christopher's body. A canine unit picked up the scent and led the team to a small hill where they found a human skull with bullet holes indicating a homicide. The team believed they had discovered Christopher's remains. Further examination of the scene yielded additional evidence, including a .22 caliber bullet, a broken firearm. Dental records later confirmed the victim's identity. This breakthrough finally solved the case that had haunted investigators for 2 years. Kelly Cochran was formally charged with the murders of Christopher and Jason Cochran in April 2016. On February 13, 2017, Kelly was brought to court in Michigan to face charges. The prosecutor argued that Kelly was the mastermind behind the crime and that she had planned and executed. The prosecution presented strong evidence, including Kelly's own confession, to support their case. However, Kelly told a different story. She claimed that her husband, Jason, was the one who had planned and committed the crime. According to Kelly, Jason was jealous and had been abusing her. On the day of the crime, Jason allegedly hid in the basement and surprised Kelly and Christopher, then shot Christopher in a fit of rage. Kelly also claimed that Jason had forced her to help him dismember the body by threatening to harm her. Despite Kelly's new version of events, the jury found her guilty of premeditated murder after deliberating for 3 hours. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. After being sentenced, Kelly Cochran was sent directly to Crown Point Correctional Facility in Ionia, Michigan, where she is currently serving her sentence. Kate Wakefield Prout was born in 1952 in the ceremonial county of Gloucestershire in the northwest of England into a traditional family of English farmers. Her parents' names remain unknown, but it is well known that Kate's childhood was spent among the rural activities and games with her two brothers, Richard and Edward. The trio's bond remained strong over the years, but when adulthood arrived, Kate was the only one who pursued a different career path, working as a school teacher. During this period, both of her parents passed away. After settling the inheritance issues, the siblings divided the estate. By 1999, Kate, unmarried and childless, decided to retire early. She sold her share of the houses, intending to rest, enjoy the vast greenery, and spend more quality time with Richard and Edward. She also planned to indulge in her favorite hobbies, being near the beach, surrounded by animals, and arranging flowers. Kate moved to the countryside to live with her brothers, who were engaged in farming. At 48 years old, tall, blonde, green-eyed, and intellectually accomplished, Kate was very attractive. During this time, she met a younger neighbor, Adrien Prout, who was going through a difficult period after ending a long relationship and caring for his teenage daughter, Laura. Edward allowed Adrien to temporarily live in a mobile home on their property. In gratitude, Adrien helped with the farm work, and Edward admired him for his business acumen and drive. Kate and Adrien quickly hit it off, fell in love, and got married in September 2000. They bought a lovely house together but sold it 4 years later when they received an excellent offer. With the proceeds, they realized a dream by purchasing 115 hectares on the outskirts of Red Marley, DeVito, a beautiful area. In 2004, the couple moved to Red Hill Farm in Red Marley, investing a significant amount of $1.2 million. Plan was for Adrien to manage the farm, continue his piping business, and organize pheasant hunting events which were highly prized by wealthy British landowners. With Adrien's dedication and Kate's efforts in public relations and catering, their hunting events, which adhered to conservation rules to protect wildlife, became very popular. However, the harmony in their marriage began to falter when Laura, Adrien's 17-year-old daughter, moved in with them. Initially, the tensions were typical for having a teenager in the house. However, things worsened when Laura's boyfriend started spending a lot of time at their home. One day in 2006, prepared an elaborate lunch for the four of them, but Laura and her boyfriend decided to eat elsewhere at the last minute. Frustrated and at her wit's end, Kate confronted them with everything she had been holding back. The argument was so intense that Laura decided not to live on the farm anymore. This incident strained Kate and Adrien's relationship further, leading to frequent and heated arguments. The situation escalated to the point where Adrien, in a fit of anger, pushed Kate against a truck. Adrien pushed Kate with such force that she hit the metal siding of a truck. Determined to leave him, she packed a bag with her essentials and went to stay with her brother Richard. However, a few weeks later, they reconciled and Kate returned to Adrien. The peace was short-lived. On February 1st, 2007, Kate called her brother Richard again, revealing that Adrien had been arrested for domestic violence. During a brutal argument, plates were thrown, hitting Kate on the head, and the confrontation continued in the garden. It ended with Adrien holding her by the neck over an empty pool, threatening to drop her. Despite mutual accusations, there were no witnesses. After this terrifying incident, Kate stayed with Richard and his wife for a considerable time. During this period, she confided in them about Adrien's controlling and abusive behavior. She revealed that despite co-owning their property, Adrien withheld her share of the income, forcing her to rely on her pension for personal expenses. Realizing the marriage was over, Richard and his wife were unaware that Kate had remained in contact with Adrien. In fact, 2 months after the pool incident, Adrien convinced her to meet face-to-face. They reconciled that night, but the happiness was short-lived and the heated arguments resumed. Determined to protect her financial interests, Kate began documenting numerous details about her marriage in her personal diary, expressing herself in ways she had never done before. The summer of 2007 was tumultuous, and in an attempt to save their marriage, Kate planned a romantic trip to Italy, buying tickets for October. When Adrien backed out at the last minute, Kate invited her sister-in-law instead. Before leaving, Kate made arrangements to ensure Adrien was comfortable at home, including hiring a woman named Diane Bellamy to care for the dogs, plants, and day-to-day tasks. Upon returning, Kate suspected a clandestine romance between Adrien and Diane. Though Diane testified in court that it wasn't true, she admitted that Adrien had attempted to kiss her several times. One evening in late October 2007, while at a bar with friends and clients, Kate, inebriated, began airing her grievances loudly. She accused Adrien of having an affair and criticized Laura, Adrien's daughter. When Adrien tried to calm her, Kate slapped him in front of everyone. The party ended abruptly, and Kate spent the night at a neighbor's house. Following this incident, they seriously considered divorce. Kate sought legal advice and requested an updated appraisal of their shared property, which had significantly increased in value to $1.84 million. Adrien offered her $850,000 in maintenance. But on Sunday, November 4, 2007, Kate refused. She stated that the only offer she would accept, being generous, was $1.13 million, which she felt was fair. Adrien was furious, knowing that to pay her that amount, he would have to sell the land they had bought 3.5 years earlier, an option he was unwilling to consider. The next day, Monday, November 5, 2007, Kate was seen at a fruit market in Leadberry and later, around 3:30 p.m., contacted her bank. After withdrawing $21,000, she rejected Adrien's financial settlement in the divorce negotiations. What happened next has been pieced together as follows. Around 5:30 p.m., they argued in one of the tourist lodges they offered to hunting enthusiasts on their property. Adrien was preparing for a pheasant hunt with clients scheduled for the next day. Knowing this, Kate threatened to disrupt the event and embarrass him in front of everyone unless he agreed to her demands. Furious, he remained steadfast in his position. Kate reminded him that the property was purchased largely with her father's inheritance. The argument escalated until Adrien grabbed her by the neck with both hands and squeezed with all his strength. After about 15 seconds, Kate fell to the ground, lifeless. Realizing he no longer had to divide his fortune, Adrien went to the main house, sat in a chair, poured himself a whiskey and savored it. A while later he returned, wrapped Kate's body in a curtain and some large white plastic sheets, put her body in the trunk of his truck and drove to a local bar for a few beers. By the time he returned to the car, it was dark. He then drove to a wooded area on the outskirts of their pheasant hunting grounds and dug a grave about 5 feet deep and as long. Finally, he buried the body and left. With no news from his sister and unable to reach her by phone, Richard asked a mutual friend who lived nearby to check on her. The friend found the door unlocked and Kate's car parked outside, but no sign of either Kate or Adrien. Like Richard, the friend couldn't reach them on their cell phones. Richard went to the house and waited with his friend for Adrien to return. When Adrien finally arrived, he claimed he hadn't seen Kate for days. Shocked by his response and his evident coldness, Richard pressed him. Adrien defended himself, saying he hadn't looked for her because he didn't consider her missing. He thought she was just keeping her distance. Under Richard's insistence, on November 10, 2007, Adrien reported Kate's strange absence to the police. Despite launching an extensive search of the farm and its surroundings, the authorities found no trace of Kate. The last confirmed sighting was on Monday at the fruit market. After that, nothing. Given the peaceful nature of their village and Kate's popularity with neighbors, the situation was deeply troubling. No one in the village suspected Adrien. As a wealthy, middle-aged businessman, they believed he had too much to lose to harm his wife. However, the police couldn't ignore his connection to the missing woman. On Sunday, November 11, 2007, Adrien was brought in for questioning. The police immediately noticed some peculiar details. Simultaneously, a search of the couple's property revealed that Kate had left without taking anything. No jewelry, clothes, money, or credit cards. Not even her car, which was still parked there. It was highly unusual. 3 days after the initial interview, authorities began to suspect the worst. By then, they were considering several possibilities. The first was that Kate had left for some reason and after encountering harm, was unable to return or contact her family. The second was that she had left deliberately and didn't want to be found. The final, more sinister scenario was that a crime had occurred, either an abduction or something worse. This launched one of the largest search operations in Gloucestershire, involving over 60 officers. Additionally, the same trained dogs used in the search for missing British girl Madeleine McCann were deployed. Dozens of police officers combed the grounds while helicopters equipped with infrared cameras and tactical police divers scoured the ponds. To grasp the scale and difficulty faced by the search team, the estate spanned over 250 acres, equivalent to approximately 240 American football fields, each measuring 1.32 acres. And this was only a fifth of the cultivable land, which also included at least half the area covered by woodland. Initially, officers identified over 100 areas where a body could be buried, but ultimately ruled them all out. They also searched inside Kate and Adrien's home and around the property's perimeter using specialized dogs. Despite the challenges of searching without a body, the dog indicated a spot near the patio, which, according to its handler, suggested a body had been there at some point. This result strengthened investigators' belief that Adrien was the prime suspect. But without solid evidence, there was little they could do. Around this time, Diane ran into Adrien at a bar. Believing he was devastated like everyone else, she expressed her support. To her surprise, Adrien responded with absurd statements, claiming that Kate had been taken away without specifying by whom, and he asked her not to ask further questions. On November 27, 2007, Adrien was arrested, and simultaneously a second search of the vast property was conducted using helicopters equipped with thermal sensors. After hours with no results, Adrien was released without charges. While outsiders believed Adrien was incapable of harming anyone, Kate's brothers suspected foul play and thought Adrien's hands were stained with blood. These suspicions seemed validated as Adrien continued his life as if nothing had happened. In fact, a month after Kate's disappearance, Adrien met Debbie Garlick, a 41-year-old divorced mother of two, at a nightclub in Staunton. They quickly developed a romance with Debbie, captivated by his personality, believing his innocence and thinking the police and justice system were wrongly accusing him. The romance thrived in the following weeks and months. In early February 2008, Diane encountered Adrien again and noticed he seemed frightened. Meanwhile, investigators found Kate's personal diary in her car, leading to Adrien's second arrest on February 19, 2008, for suspicion of murder. However, he was released on bail, and Richard and Edward begged him to confess what they believed was already obvious. Spring and summer passed, with each new season deepening the despair of Kate's loved ones, who watched in disbelief as the case seemed to dissolve without progress or answers. The stark contrast was Adrien's idyllic life with his now-fiancée Debbie. In February 2009, the police informed Adrien that he was no longer a suspect. Elated, he convinced Debbie to move in with him at the property he had once shared with Kate. However, 3 weeks later, on March 10, 2009, the police knocked on the door to arrest Adrien once more. Although he was jailed for a month, he was again released on bail. Unbeknownst to him, the investigation continued quietly, and shortly after, Adrien was formally charged with the crime. This did not prevent his relationship with Debbie from progressing. Released on bail, they got engaged in June of that year, and by then, Debbie was pregnant. Their daughter was born on January 7, 2010, after a scheduled delivery. Despite the looming criminal charges and the ugly suspicions surrounding Adrien, they maintained the facade of a happy family, with Adrien portraying himself as a good father and husband. The trial began on January 21, 2010, with Adrien proclaiming his innocence. Debbie attended the hearings, bringing their weeks-old baby. One of the testimonies was from Diane, who clarified that despite Kate's suspicions, there had never been any relationship between her and Adrien. Diane recounted how Adrien had tried to seduce her and detailed his strange behavior after Kate's disappearance. By the end of the third week, in a remarkable effort, the investigation officers convinced the jury that all evidence pointed towards Adrien. Consequently, in February 2010, Adrien Prout was found guilty of murder and sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum of 18 years behind bars. The verdict also prevented him from profiting from Kate's will, which she had made in his name. Despite the conviction, Adrien's family, Friends, neighbors, and especially his fiancée continued to believe in his innocence. They clung to the idea that without a body, there was no crime or valid accusation. Supporters rallied to free him. Laura, Adrien's eldest daughter, started a social media campaign, while Debbie's daughter from her first marriage did something similar, gathering nearly 500 signatures for his release. Debbie, holding their daughter, campaigned tirelessly and even offered a $14,000 reward for any information proving Adrien's innocence, money she had inherited from her father. Desperate to clear her partner's name, Debbie convinced Adrien to take a lie detector test. She challenged him, saying he had nothing to lose if he was innocent. Confident as always, Adrien agreed, believing he could outsmart the machine. Debbie, hopeful for his release, hired polygraph expert who visited the prison in Lancashire. Adrien appeared calm and confident, stating he was doing it for Debbie. However, Adrien failed the test, and the expert informed him of the results. The expert then called Debbie, who was shocked and in disbelief. Debbie needed answers, so she visited Adrien in prison to hear the truth from him directly. Still harboring a sliver of hope that it was all a misunderstanding, Debbie was devastated when Adrien confessed the terrible truth. In shock, she listened to his pleas not to leave him but knew she had to be resolute. The burden and anguish were immense, but Debbie contacted the investigators and told them everything. The homicide detectives interrogated Adrien again and finally obtained the long-sought confession. All that remained was to locate Kate's body. On Friday, November 18, 2011, authorities took Adrien to the farm. Handcuffed, Adrien led them to a wooded area within the pheasant hunting grounds and indicated where he had buried Kate. Despite the directions, the search was challenging, requiring ground-penetrating radar and search dogs. A forensic archaeologist also assisted in the delicate task. On the fifth day of digging, they found what appeared to be Kate's remains. Richard and Edward were the first to be notified, and although they were informed that formal identification was still pending, the news brought them a sense of closure. The doubts, anguish, and exhaustion they had endured for 4 years gave way to a feeling of relief. This relief grew when the forensic team confirmed the remains were indeed Kate's. The Gloucestershire police broke the news to the press and offered Richard and Edward a chance to speak about their harrowing experience over the past 4 years. Richard and Edward emphasized the difficulty of knowing who was responsible for Kate's disappearance while being unaware of the fate Adrien had chosen for her. They expressed their only desire was to give Kate the rest she deserved and to move forward with their lives. When asked about their feelings towards Debbie, Richard acknowledged that she was now in a position similar to theirs, finally forced to face a terrible truth. The family held Kate's funeral on January 4, 2012, choosing to keep it strictly private. It had been 4 years and 2 months since her brutal murder, but Richard said they were relieved to have closure. By then, the veil that once clouded Debbie's judgment had lifted, and she understood the manipulative nature of Adrien. In media interviews, Debbie stated she was certain Adrien had used her and their young daughter to portray a false image of a responsible and loving family man. As of 2024, the once powerful English landowner remains behind bars. The farm was sold by Kate's brothers, with the proceeds going to a local hospital and to Kate's nieces and nephews. Case of Shannon Mani was born on April 6, 1997, to Anshamani and Vijay Mani. When she was a small child, her parents immigrated to the United States from Fiji. The family settled in Waukesha, a small town in southeastern Wisconsin, where Shannon grew up and attended school. She was intelligent, attractive, and very outgoing. Her parents believed Waukesha was the perfect place to raise their children. After completing high school in 2015, Shannon enrolled at the University of Wisconsin at Milwaukee. She was passionate about helping others and aspired to become a social worker. Despite her busy schedule, Shannon worked with her father at an organic food company. It was at work that she met Quentin Neal, 26, who was applying for a similar position. Quentin had a strong desire to make a positive impact on people's lives. Shannon shared a similar passion, dreaming of building a shelter for women and children, while Quentin wanted to create a safe haven for his community. With their similar interests and outlook on life, Shannon and Quentin quickly formed a close bond. As their friendship blossomed into romance, Shannon was overjoyed to have met Quentin, and soon they started living together. Quentin showed genuine care for Shannon, and she ensured their relationship remained happy. They began making plans for their future together. However, their lives took a drastic turn when Shannon vanished without a trace. On April 13, 2018, Shannon failed to pick up her younger brother from school and didn't show up to work. Her phone was switched off and she hadn't informed anyone about her absence from work. Concerned, her parents went to the police station, unable to locate their daughter. Initially, detectives suspected that Shannon, being young, might have run away or gone off with friends. But her parents disagreed, knowing their daughter well. She wasn't the type to simply switch off her phone and abandon her family, leaving them worried and searching for her. Shannon's mother shared crucial details with investigators, prompting them to take the case more seriously. Shannon was 4 months pregnant when she vanished, which raised concerns since pregnant women rarely disappear without something bad happening to them. Furthermore, some of her belongings, including money and important documents, was still in her room, which was another alarming indication. Shannon's parents told investigators that the father of her child was 27-year-old Quentin Neal. However, when Quentin was contacted by phone, he claimed to have no knowledge of Shannon's whereabouts. According to Quentin, Shannon had been living with her parents, and he hadn't seen her at all that day. The investigators called Quentin again, asking him to come to the police station to answer some questions. Quentin appeared anxious, promising to arrive at the station immediately. When Shannon's parents were still present, Quentin told the investigators that the last time he had seen her was over 24 hours ago, when she left his house to pick up her little brother from school. They had only exchanged a few text messages since then and had not been in contact again. The investigators asked Quentin if he had any idea where Shannon might be, but he was unable to provide one. According to Quentin, Shannon's life revolved around school and work, and she had always been in touch with her loved ones until that day. However, Quentin recalled that there was another guy who had shown interest in Shannon. Despite knowing she was in a relationship and pregnant, this guy had relentlessly pursued Shannon's affection, even after she asked him to leave her alone. The investigators instantly considered this guy a person of possible concern, as jealousy often leads to reckless behavior. The next day, police began questioning Shannon's friends to gather new information. They distributed details of the search for the young pregnant woman to all police stations in Wisconsin the same day. The first disturbing discovery was made. Shannon's car was found in Milwaukee, about 20 minutes from her home. Forensic experts carefully examined the vehicle inside and out, but found no suspicious signs. There was no evidence of carjacking, struggle, or any other crime. However, Shannon's purse and cell phone were missing from the car. 3 sets of fingerprints were found on the vehicle, including Shannon's and Quentin's. The origin of the third set remained unknown, and the police had to identify the person who left them. That same afternoon, the man mentioned by Quentin was questioned by investigators. Although he claimed to be upset about Shannon's disappearance, he denied Quentin's allegations, stating that he and Shannon were just friends and that he had never pursued a romantic relationship with her. When pressed further, he admitted to confessing his love to Shannon in the past, but she had rejected him, saying they could only be friends. Since then, he had not attempted to win her affection. The guy's fingerprints were found to match those in Shannon's car. However, he explained that he often got rides from Shannon to university, which is why his prints were in her car. He also claimed to have been 100 miles away from Waukesha, attending a baseball game when Shannon went missing. The investigators checked and confirmed his alibi, ruling him out as a suspect. The case got a surprising and crucial break when Shannon's mother, Aunt Shamani, found her daughter's Apple Watch and checked her recent text messages. She took the watch to the police station, handing it over to investigators. Reviewing Shannon's texts, they made a significant discovery. Despite Quentin's claim that he hadn't met Shannon on the day she vanished, the text showed they had arranged to meet up that day. This meant Quentin had lied to the investigators and Shannon's parents, making him the prime suspect. While examining Shannon's watch messages, investigators uncovered cracks in her relationship with Quentin. they found texts revealing Quentin's abusive behavior towards the pregnant mother. This revelation shocked Shannon, who had been unaware of her lover's true nature. Quentin apologized profusely, begging her not to leave him. Shannon proposed they take a break from each other. The investigators' suspicions grew, fueled by Quentin's troubled past. He had a criminal record, having recently been released from prison after serving time for robbery. He had multiple arrests for assault and other misdemeanors. Shannon's parents had also grown wary of Quentin, noticing their daughter's persistent depression. Moreover, Quentin exhibited emotional instability regarding the unborn baby, further solidifying the investigators' doubts about his character. After Shannon informed her parents about her pregnancy, they arranged a meeting with Quentin, during which he assured them that he would take care of both Shannon and the baby, claiming he had always wanted to have children. However, a few days later, according to Aunt Shimani, Quentin sent Shannon some disturbing texts, contradicting his earlier promise and stating that he didn't want the baby. He even suggested that Shannon should consider having an abortion. The police attempted to track Shannon's cell phone and discovered it was last active in the afternoon of April 13th, near Quentin's residence. Shannon's mother noticed severe bruising on her arms and inquired about the cause. Shannon broke down in tears and revealed that Quentin had physically assaulted her, punching her with his fists while she was in her vehicle. Despite her parents' warnings to end the relationship, Shannon eventually forgave Quentin and resumed dating him. With this concerning information, investigators grew increasingly worried that they might not find Shannon alive, prompting them to obtain a search warrant and rush to Quentin's house. At first, the crime scene did not appear to show any signs of a struggle or disturbance. The area was clean, with no broken furniture or objects. Forensic experts sprayed the first floor with luminol, a chemical that detects blood, but found no evidence. However, when they applied the same test to the basement, the walls and floor glowed, indicating the presence of blood. The numerous marks found at the scene strongly suggested that Shannon was likely no longer alive. Quentin Neal was arrested and taken into custody. Before questioning him, investigators reviewed the contents of his phone and discovered that he had recently searched online for ways to remove evidence of a crime using a lye chemical. This suggested that he was planning to hide traces of his crime. During the interrogation, Quentin initially denied any knowledge of Shannon's whereabouts and claimed to have no connection to her disappearance. However, faced with solid evidence, he began to alter his story. Eventually, he agreed to confess to everything. Quentin claimed to have acted in self-defense when he took Shannon's life. He told investigators that Shannon had visited his house to discuss their future and their child. But the conversation escalated into an argument. According to Quentin, Shannon then entered the kitchen, grabbed a knife and a gun that were being kept for emergencies, and began threatening him. Quentin said he felt compelled to act quickly to protect himself, leading to a physical struggle that ended in Shannon's death. Quentin reiterated to the investigators that he had acted in self-defense, but they were skeptical due to the lack of defensive wounds on his body. Despite their doubts, they continued to listen to his account. Quentin said that, realizing the gravity of his actions, he panicked in the basement where the incident occurred. In an attempt to conceal the evidence, he used a large suitcase to hide the body. Quentin Neal led the police to a storage unit 6 miles from his home, where he had stashed a suitcase containing Shannon's body. When detectives opened the suitcase, they found Shannon's lifeless body, her wrists and ankles bound with duct tape, contradicting Quentin's claim of self-defense. Forensic examination revealed Shannon died from 2 gunshot wounds to the head and had additional knife wounds on her body. Shannon's parents were devastated when detectives informed them of the discovery of their daughter's body on April 18, 2018. Quentin Neal was subsequently indicted for the murders of Shannon Manny and her unborn child. The evidence gathered, including their correspondence from the day of her death, was sufficient for the court to reach a guilty verdict. The dispute had begun when Shannon visited Quentin's home to discuss her pregnancy, but she never left his house alive. The trial of Quentin Neal, accused of killing Shannon, was set to begin in the spring of 2019. However, just days before the trial, anonymous letters were sent to attorneys and court officials, claiming that someone else was responsible for Shannon's death. The letters were later deemed irrelevant after the author, a friend of Quentin's, was identified and found to be trying to confuse the investigation and help Quentin. Quentin faced the death penalty, but denied the charges and claimed he acted ill-defense. 15 months had passed since Shannon's death, and her family waited anxiously for justice, trying to stay positive. Shannon's mother and Shamani worked hard to keep her daughter's memory alive and not lose hope. Shannon had been passionate about supporting women and children affected by domestic violence, and her family had planned to build a shelter in her honor. However, that dream was never realized, as Shannon herself became a victim of violence. On July 15, 2019, Quentin Neal reached a plea deal with investigators, admitting guilt in the deaths of Shannon and her child. As part of the deal, prosecutors dropped the death penalty. 2 days later, on July 17, 2019, the Milwaukee County Circuit Court sentenced the 28-year-old to 2 concurrent life sentences without parole eligibility, ensuring he will spend the rest of his life in prison. At his sentencing, Neal remained silent, failing to explain his motive for the crime. Shannon's mother and Shamani expressed relief that justice had been served, noting that the only silver lining was that Neal would no longer harm anyone else. The family plans to keep Shannon's memory alive by opening a shelter in her honor. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.